I never expected the past to track me down on a quiet Tuesday morning. But that's exactly what happened. And didn't knock softly, either. It tore straight through the life I'd spent almost 2 decades trying to rebuild. The twist hit me the moment I opened my front door and saw the envelope. A certified letter, thick, stiff, heavy, like trouble sealed in paper. I hadn't seen that law firm's name in more than 30 years. And the second I read it, my chest tightened. McLennan and Fields, Harrisburg. My father's old attorneys. Right then, I knew something was coming. And it wasn't anything good. Before I go on, let me ask you, what would you have done if a letter like that showed up in your mailbox after years of silence? Would you open it? Or leave it on the counter and pretend it never came? Tell me in the comments what you would have done. And if you want to stay with me through this whole story, hit that subscribe button. You'll understand why soon. I stepped back inside my little house on Maple Street, the same one I've been renting since I retired from the post office. Carlisle, Pennsylvania isn't loud. That's why I chose it. I wanted a place where the days blended into each other, where mornings were quiet and the nights didn't demand anything from me. Before we continue this story, please subscribe and hit the notification button. This is the only way you can support our work. Most days look the same. I wake up at 6, make coffee, read the paper, cook eggs if I'm hungry enough. Some afternoons, I walk around the square, listening to people talk about the weather and the price of gas as if those are the biggest problems in the world. I used to envy them. I still do in a way. Living alone gets comfortable until something shakes you awake. I set the envelope on the kitchen table like it was a snake and moved around it for a minute, pretending I needed to refill my mug, pretending I had anywhere else to look. But my eyes kept drifting back to that name, McLennan and Fields, printed in dark blue ink, like the past, trying to claw its way through my present. I finally sat down, slid the edge of a knife under the flap, and opened it. The heading told me everything before I even finished the page. Noticeable reading. Estate of Raymond Hollis. My father. A man I hadn't seen in 24 years. A man who taught me early that silence could be a punishment and anger could be a language. A man who could lift a tractor engine with bare hands and crush a person's confidence just as easily. I swallowed hard, the room shrinking around me. He was dead. I should have felt something, right? Relief, sadness, closure, something. But what I felt was hollow, like someone had reached inside me and scooped everything out. As I kept reading, the letter said the will would be read in Harrisburg 2 days from now at their downtown office. 10 in the morning sharp. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. Of all the people to drag me back into their orbit, it had to be him, the man who'd spent half his life reminding me I wasn't the son he wanted. The man I walked away from at 44, after one final argument that cracked whatever pieces of family we had left. Patrick and Denise would be there. Of course they would. They stayed behind. They played the roles he carved out for them and lived inside the lines he drew. They always made sure I knew I was the outsider. The one who left, the one who didn't obey, the one who didn't belong. Just thinking about seeing them again made my stomach twist. I pushed the letter away and stood up, pacing across the kitchen. The floor creaked under my steps, one of the few sounds in my life that didn't judge me. I should have thrown that letter straight into the trash. I should have said, let them all have whatever scraps he left behind. I've survived fine without any of it. But the thing about wounds is they don't heal if someone keeps reopening them. I found myself drifting toward the window, watching a man walk his dog along the sidewalk, blissfully unaware of how a single envelope can change the air in a room. I used to think peace was something you built by walking away. Now, I wasn't so sure. What if going back just this once finally gave me answers? What if it only made everything worse? Part of me didn't want to care at all. But another part, the one I don't like admitting still exists, wondered whether my father left something unsaid, something unfinished, something he could only face once he no longer had to look anyone in the eye. I sat again and read the letter one more time. My hands weren't steady anymore. The older I get, the more I feel things in my bones before I feel them in my chest. And right now, my bones felt heavy, like they were sinking into the chair. Did I even want to know what he decided? Did I want to sit in a room with my brother and sister while a lawyer read words written by a man who couldn't talk to me when he was alive? What if his final message hurt worse than everything that came before? You ever feel that tug of war between wanting answers and wanting to stay safe? If you've been through something like that, tell me. I'm not the only one carrying ghosts. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence. The house felt smaller by the second. I looked down at the letter again, the edges curling slightly for my grip. Going to that reading might rip open scars I spent years covering. But not going meant letting my father have the last word. And I'd done that too many times in my life already. I folded the letter carefully, even though I wanted to crumple it. I slid it back into the envelope and held it for a long moment. My breath came slow. My voice came slower. Why now? I whispered. And that was the moment I realized the past wasn't finished with me. Not even close. I didn't sleep much the night the letter arrived. I lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about a place I'd spent half my life trying to forget. Funny how the mind works. One envelope, and suddenly I was back in Perry County, standing on the dirt road that led to the old Hollis farmhouse. If you've ever tried outrunning your childhood, you know it never falls behind. It just waits. I grew up on a patch of land outside Shermansdale. 40 acres of fields, woods, and work. Always work. The farmhouse was 2 stories, painted white at one point, though the paint had chipped long before I was old enough to remember. Winters were cold. Summers were loud with insects, and the walls carried every argument like they were built to hold them. My father, Raymond Hollis, ran that house like it was a barracks. He didn't shout much, not the way some men do, but he didn't need to. His silence was sharper than most people's anger. He could stop you in your tracks with one look, the kind that said you were already disappointing him before you even opened your mouth. Patrick, my older brother, never disappointed him, at least not that I ever saw. Patrick was born into Dad's approval, the same way some folks are born into money. He walked like Dad, worked like Dad, and repeated every rule Dad ever carved into our lives. By the time I was 10, I understood Patrick was the son my father thought he deserved. Then there was Denise, the youngest. Quiet, watchful. She clung to Dad the way a branch clings to a storm-bent tree. She didn't question him, didn't argue. If Dad said the world was square, she'd nod and say she always suspected as much. And then there was me, the one who asked why the world worked the way it did, the one who hesitated before obeying, the one who didn't believe fear was the same thing as respect. My father didn't like that. It turned every day into a test I wasn't meant to pass. I remember mornings in that house with painful clarity, waking up before sunup, hearing Dad's boots in the hallway. He'd push open our doors, never knocking, and bark. Up. The whole house snapped awake like a machine. Breakfast wasn't a meal. It was fuel before labor. Dad sat at the head of a table with his flannel shirt rolled at the sleeves, the newspaper beside his coffee. Patrick sat on his right, Denise on his left, and I took whatever seat was left. Dad rarely looked at me unless something was wrong, and in his eyes, something was usually wrong. One morning stands out more than all the others. I must have been 16. Early March, the ground was still half frozen, the air sharp enough to bite the inside of your nose. Dad sent me to split firewood before school. I'd done it 1,000 times, but that morning, the axe handle cracked clean in half the second I swung it. I stared at the broken wood in my hand, knowing exactly what it meant. Dad came out onto the porch, Patrick behind him. Denise stood in the kitchen window like a shadow. "What did you do?" Dad asked. "The handle is old. I said. It finally gave. You don't break what you take care of. I remember the anger rising in my chest like heat. For years, I'd swallowed every unfair comment, every accusation. But something changed in me that morning. Maybe it was the edge of adulthood settling in. Maybe I was just tired of feeling wrong all the time. I looked him in the eye and said, "Not everything is my fault." It was the first time I'd ever challenged him that directly. The air froze. Even the birds went quiet. Dad took 2 steps toward me, his jaw set. "You watch yourself, boy." "No," I said. "You watch yourself. You blame me for everything. You act like Patrick's perfect, and like Denise doesn't breathe unless you allow it. I'm done with it." Patrick muttered under his breath, "Here we go," like he'd been waiting years for me to snap. Dad's face changed, not anger, but something worse. Disappointment sharpened into contempt. It was like he was seeing me clearly for the very first time and didn't like what he saw. "You're nothing like this family," he said. My chest tightened. I knew those words would stay with me for years. I knew it even as they came out of his mouth. A part of me wanted to take it back, apologize, retreat, make the moment disappear. But another part, the part that had been growing silently since childhood, refused. "I know," I said. "That's why I'm leaving when school's done." Denise gasped from behind the window. Patrick shook his head with that same smirk he wore whenever Dad scolded me. Dad didn't say another word. He just turned and walked inside like he'd washed his hands of me. And I did leave. 2 weeks after graduation, I packed a single bag and drove off in a rusted pickup I bought with money from working weekends at the feed store. I didn't look back. Not once. But here's the truth I never told anyone. I didn't leave without wounds. I carried that house with me. I carried Dad's words. I carried the silence between us that stretched all the way into adulthood. I carried guilt for leaving Denise behind and resentment for Patrick taking Dad's side even when he knew better. A clean break is never clean when it comes to family. And as I sat in my quiet house in Carlisle the night after that certified letter arrived, I realized something I'd spent years denying. I never healed from that day on the porch. I just learned how to walk with a scar. And now my father, dead and buried, was pulling me back to the place that broke me. The morning of the will reading, I sat in the parking lot of McLennan and Fields in Harrisburg longer than I should have. It was 10:54 a.m., and the meeting was set for 11. 6 minutes to either walk inside or drive away and pretend the letter had never come. I watched people move through the glass doors like it was any ordinary Tuesday. For them it was. For me, it felt like walking into a room full of ghosts. When I finally stepped inside, I found Patrick and Denise already seated in the reception area. They looked up at me the way distant relatives do when they're surprised you showed up at a funeral. Polite enough to hide the shock, cold enough to remind you you're not really part of the circle. Patrick gave a stiff nod. "Sam." Denise's smile was small and strained. "We didn't know if you'd come." "I wasn't sure either," I said. The assistant led us into a conference room with thick carpet and the faint smell of old paper. A long wooden table stretched across the space. At the head of it sat attorney Mark Benson, the same man who handled my father's business for decades. "Thank you all for coming," he said, smoothing the folder in front of him. My stomach tightened. He cleared his throat. "We're here for the reading of the last will and testament of Mr. Raymond Hollis." There was something cruel about hearing my father's name spoken with that clean, professional tone. Death strips a person down to legal terms. Benson began with the usual lines. "Being of sound mind, final wishes, family beneficiaries." Then he paused. "To Samuel Hollis." I held my breath. Patrick leaned back in his chair. Denise folded her hands in her lap. "Your father leaves the family Bible, along with a small box of personal effects." That was it. Not the house. Not the 40 acres in Duncannon. Not the equipment savings or accounts. Just a Bible I hadn't touched in 50 years, and a box of whatever he thought passed as sentiment. I felt heat rising behind my eyes, but I kept my breath steady. Benson continued, to Patrick and Denise Hollis, your father leaves full ownership of the house, property, farm equipment, vehicles, and all remaining financial accounts. They didn't look at me, not once, but I saw the flicker in their faces. A quick, controlled triumph. Not joy, not gloating. Just a satisfied confirmation that Dad's final judgment lined up neatly with their version of the story. Benson opened another sheet. There's also a written statement from your father. I'll read it aloud for the record. I didn't want to hear it. Every part of me wanted to stand up and leave, but I froze. He wished it to be known, Benson read carefully, that Samuel made the choice years ago to walk away from the family and its responsibilities. As such, this distribution reflects the path he chose. Patrick exhaled through his nose like he'd been bracing for that line and finally got to hear it. Denise shifted in her chair, not quite looking at me, not quite avoiding me either. A soft, guilty glance, quick as a blink, gone as fast as it came. I felt the weight of every mile between Carlisle and the old farmhouse press onto my shoulders. It was one thing to be ignored by the living. It was something entirely different to be rejected by the dead. Benson closed the folder. That concludes the formal reading. No one spoke. The room felt colder than when we'd walked in. Patrick stood first. Well, that settles it. Denise touched his arm gently. We should go. She turned to me as they moved toward the door. This isn't personal, Sam. Yes, Patrick said. It is. They left without another word. I stayed seated for a moment, my hands resting flat on the table, trying to breathe through the sting. Being cut out wasn't a surprise. I'd always suspected Dad favored them, even after I left. But hearing him justify it in front of them, that hit deeper than I expected. I wasn't just excluded. I was erased. When I finally stood, my legs felt unsteady. The lawyer walked me to the doorway and handed me a plain cardboard box along with the Bible, its leather cracked with age. Your father wanted you to have these, he said quietly. I didn't respond. I stepped into the hallway, carrying the pieces of a life I no longer recognized. As I walked out onto Front Street, cars rolled past like nothing in the world had changed. But inside me, something had shifted, something bitter, heavy, and unfinished. My father managed to wound me one last time, even from the grave. I got into my truck, set the Bible on the passenger seat, and pulled the door shut. For a long moment, I sat there gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady the shaking in my hands. It was strange, really. You can spend years convincing yourself you no longer care about someone's approval. But the moment they shove you out a final time, you realize you were still waiting for a different ending. As I started the engine, one thought circled through my mind, painful and unwanted. Maybe I never stopped being that 16-year-old who couldn't win in his father's eyes. When I pulled away from the curb, I didn't know it yet, but the wasn't the real beginning. It was only the door to a truth my father never meant for me to see. And that truth was waiting in a sealed envelope still sitting on the attorney's desk. I had just reached the edge of the parking lot when I heard Benson call my name. Sam, hold on a moment. I turned. He stepped out the doorway with something in his hand, a small cream-colored envelope. It was sealed, the flap slightly yellowed, like it had been tucked away for years. This wasn't part of the formal will, he said quietly. Your father asked that it be given to you privately. Privately. That word burned. He handed it to me, then stepped back inside without another word. I stood there, cars passing behind me, the wind pushing at my jacket, staring at the envelope like it might explode. My name was written on it in my father's handwriting. Firm, sharp, unmistakable. I sat back inside my truck and held it for a long moment before finally tearing it open. A single line. 4 words. You were right. Always. I read it twice, then a third time. For a man who spoke more with his silence than his mouth. Those four words carried a weight that made my chest ache. Right about what? Right about him? Right about the land? Right about leaving? I didn't know. And that uncertainty was its own kind of torment. I folded the note carefully and slid it back into the envelope. The air in the truck felt heavier, like the truth was sitting in the seat beside me. By the time I reached home in Carlisle, the afternoon light had softened. I carried the Bible and the box into the house and set them on the coffee table. The place was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your thoughts echo louder than they should. I picked up the Bible first. The leather felt brittle, like it could crumble if I wasn't careful. When I opened it, the spine cracked the way old books do, releasing a faint smell of dust and memory. That's when an envelope slipped out and fell onto the floor. It was thinner, older, edges worn. My mother's handwriting covered the front. Margaret Hollis. My breath caught. I hadn't seen her handwriting in decades. For a moment, I just stared at it, afraid to touch it, afraid of what it might say. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the envelope. The letter inside was written on lined paper, the kind she used for grocery lists and birthday notes. It read like she'd written it in a hurry, but every word was deliberate. She talked about the land, the 40 acres in Duncannon. Land, she said, once belonged to her family, passed to her before she married my father. Land, she wrote, she had no intention of giving up until he pressured her, not forced in the physical sense. Pressure in the quiet ways Raymond used. Intimidation, guilt, anger that grew inside walls where nobody else could see. She wrote that she felt cornered, afraid of what refusing him might do to their marriage, to us kids. She signed it over, but she regretted it every day after. Every day. She ended the letter with a line that cut me deeper than anything in the will. I wanted you to know the truth someday, Sam. I just didn't know how to say it while I was still here. I pressed the paper to my knee, bowing my head, letting the weight of it settle. I could almost hear her voice, soft, tired, full of something she never said out loud. I realized then how little I had understood about her life, her choices, her silence. She had struggled in ways none of us kids saw, not even Denise, who stayed closest to her. Tears threatened, but I held them back. Grief has a way of coming late, long after you think it's finished with you. For the second time in one day, I sat staring at something that changed everything I thought I knew about my family. My father cut me out of his will, but my mother, she'd left me truth he never wanted me to find. The note in the attorney's hand, the letter in the Bible. Something was wrong with the story I'd been told all my life. And for the first time in decades, I felt a spark of defiance, the same spark that made me stand up to my father on that cold morning back in Perry County. Whatever this was, I wasn't done. Not anymore. Sam sat at his kitchen table long after midnight, the house wrapped in that breathless quiet only small towns know. The letter, the one tucked inside the Bible his father thought was an appropriate consolation prize, lay open in front of him, its edges trembling every time his hands did. He read his mother's handwriting again, and again, and again. Each loop of her pen felt like a whisper from a world he'd lost decades ago. The truth wasn't gentle. Margaret Hollis had once owned 40 acres of fertile land outside Duncannon. Her land her parents left her. Land she'd nurtured as fiercely as she'd nurtured her son. But she'd signed it away because Raymond insisted it was best for the family. Because she feared what would happen if she didn't. Because silence was safer than standing up to a man who made conflict feel like standing too close to a loaded gun. Sam leaned back, staring at the ceiling. He could hear her voice from memory. Soft, patient, always the calm in the storm. But now that voice carried another layer he had never recognized. Fear. He pressed his palm over his eyes and exhaled shakily. "How many nights did you cry alone, Mom?" he whispered. He remembered flashes, her stepping between him and Raymond during arguments, her hurried apologies, her gentle plea for him to let it go just to keep the peace. As a boy, he thought she was trying to calm him. As a man, he realized she'd been protecting him and paying the price herself. The grief cut in two directions: sorrow for what she endured and guilt for walking away before he understood the cost she had carried. Sam folded the letter carefully, setting it on top of the Bible. He felt a pull inside him, subtle but unmistakable, something that had been dormant for decades, stirred awake, a mix of outrage and clarity, the kind of clarity that arrives when a lie finally collapses under the weight of truth. Raymond had painted Sam as the son who abandoned the family, but the cracks in that story were widening. If Margaret's letter was real, and Sam had no reason to doubt it, then the will reading was more than a final insult. It was a continuation of something that began long before Sam packed his bags at 18. He stared at the dark window, seeing his reflection, older, weather-tired. "Why does she hide this?" he murmured. But he knew. Some truths were too dangerous to speak while their keeper was still living alongside the one who could destroy her. His fingers drifted back to the letter. Margaret had written it in 1986, the year she died. He closed his eyes, fighting the ache, tightening his chest. She hadn't saved this for the family. She hadn't entrusted it to Patrick, or Denise, or Raymond. She had placed it where only Sam would ever find it, a message meant for one set of eyes, because he had been the one who questioned Raymond, the one who refused to become what Raymond wanted, the one she believed would understand. Eventually, Sam rose, pacing the kitchen slowly. What else did he hide from me? The question hung in the air like a challenge. The old peace he'd built in Carlisle, quiet routines, quiet days, quiet nights, felt different now. It wasn't peace at all. It was resignation. It was surviving, not living. And for the first time, Sam felt something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. He walked to the counter, grabbed his phone, and placed it beside the Bible and Margaret's letter. His hand hovered before picking it up. "I need to know," he said to the empty room. By 2:15 a.m., he had made his decision. He would find out what really happened to his mother's land, why she was pressured, what she signed, and whether the truth still had a heartbeat in the eyes of the law. Sam dialed an attorney's office in Mechanicsburg and left a message requesting a consultation. As he set the phone back down, the weight in his chest shifted, not gone, but no longer suffocating. Tomorrow, everything would begin, and he wasn't walking away this time. Before going to bed, Sam whispered, "I'll get the truth, Mom. I promise." The next morning, Sam sat in the warmly lit office of attorney Laura Greystone, a woman with steady eyes and a calm presence that reminded him, strangely, of his mother. Outside, the traffic of Mechanicsburg hummed softly. Inside, time seemed to slow just enough for him to gather the courage to relive the past he'd spent decades avoiding. Laura sifted through the documents Sam brought: the will copy, the box of personal items, Margaret's letter, and the Bible note from Raymond. She handled everything with a meticulous care that eased some of the tightness in his chest. When she finally spoke, her voice was level, deliberate. "Sam, there's a lot to unpack here, and it's more complicated and more hopeful than you might think." He swallowed. "So it means something? My mother's letter?" "It means everything," she replied. Laura leaned forward, tapping a section of the letter describing the land. "If this property originally belonged to your mother, acquired by inheritance or gifted to her, then under Pennsylvania law, it was her separate property, even after marriage." Sam frowned slightly, but she signed over. "I saw it." Laura nodded. "Yes, but the question isn't whether she signed it. The question is why she signed it, and under what conditions." A slow, unfamiliar spark warmed Sam's chest. You mean if she was pressured? Coercion, misunderstanding, emotional manipulation. Any of these could affect whether that document would hold up under scrutiny today. She paused. And your father's note? You were right. Always. That may be more significant than he realized. It suggests he acknowledged fault. Sam looked down at his hands, weathered, trembling slightly. He never apologized to me. Not once. Sometimes people confess when they think no one will ever see their confession. Laura said gently. She walked him through possibilities. Handwriting authentication for Margaret's letter. Examining old deed transfers. Comparing property records before and after the marriage. She explained that if it were proven Margaret never willingly relinquished her rights or didn't understand what she was signing, some part of the estate might legally belong to Sam. But every step forward came with an emotional price. Pursuing this meant confronting Patrick and Denise, challenging the story they'd chosen to believe, threatening the inheritance they'd claimed with such smug certainty. Sam, Laura said softly, reading the conflict on his face, this isn't just about land. Someone trusted you with the truth she couldn't speak aloud. She tapped the envelope. Your mother put this in your hands. A tight breath left him. She deserved better. Yes, Laura agreed. And you deserve answers. Silence filled the room. Heavy, but not suffocating. For once, it felt like part of a process rather than a punishment. Laura slid a form across the desk. If you want me to represent you, this is where we start. Sam stared at the paper. It felt like a doorway. Behind it lay conflict, memories, old ghosts, but also justice, and maybe something like closure. He reached for the pen slowly, his voice rough. I've run from this family my whole life, he said, but not anymore. His signature landed on the page with a sense of finality. Laura smiled softly. Then we begin today. As Sam walked out of her office into the late morning sun, a strange feeling washed over him. Not triumph, not anger, but something steadier. Resolve. For the first time in years, he wasn't just surviving his past. He was confronting it. The mediation room of the Harrisburg County office felt colder than it should have. Too bright, too quiet, too full of things that had been left unsaid for far too long. Sam sat at one end of the rectangular table, his palms resting flat, his breathing steady the way Laura had advised him. Across from him sat Patrick and Denise, his brother and sister. Though the distance between them was wider than the Susquehanna River flowing just a few miles away. Patrick leaned back in his chair as if he owned the building. Denise kept her eyes down, hands folded neatly in her lap, her expression unreadable. Sam had seen this scene years earlier in their childhood home, watching arguments unfold while she silently drifted into the wallpaper. The mediator began with introductions, but the tension was already thick enough to slice. Patrick didn't wait long. So he said, crossing his arms, you dragged us down here because you want another handout from the family you walked out on. Sam didn't flinch. I'm here because there are questions that need answers. Patrick scoffed. Questions you invented. Laura opened the folder in front of her with a steady hand. Mr. Hollis, we're not here to argue personal history. We're here because Sam discovered documents suggesting the property in Duncannon may not have been legally transferred. Denise finally looked up. What documents? Laura slid a copy of Margaret's letter across the table. This. Patrick didn't reach for it. A letter written decades ago by a woman who, let's just say, she wasn't always thinking clearly. Sam's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. Don't talk about our mother like that. She wasn't your mother more than ours, Patrick snapped. You're not the only one who lost her. No, Sam said quietly, but I'm the only one who ever tried to protect her. Patrick's eyes flashed. Denise shifted slightly, the comment landing somewhere deep, but she didn't speak. Laura continued, placing deed records beside the letter. There's a pattern here. Transfers made quickly, signatures that don't match historical documents. dates that conflict with hospital records when Mrs. Hollis was recovering from illness. "Are you calling Dad a liar?" Patrick asked, voice rising. "I'm calling for clarity," Laura replied. Denise finally reached for the paperwork, scanning it with trembling fingers. She didn't deny anything. She didn't confirm anything. She just absorbed it quietly. Patrick, though, was prepared for war. "He left you exactly what you deserved," he said, leaning forward. "A Bible and a box of junk. He knew you'd try something like this. Dad always knew who you were." Sam inhaled slowly. "I know exactly who I am, Patrick. What I don't know is why you're afraid of the truth." Patrick slammed his fist lightly against the table. "I'm afraid of nothing, especially not you." The room thickened again with silence. Sam could feel the old labels, black sheep, troublemaker, ungrateful son, rising like ghosts from the past, settling on his shoulders as if no time had passed at all. Patrick didn't see the man he'd become. Denise didn't see him either. They only saw the version their father carved into him, the outsider. Laura refocused the meeting gently. "If we move forward formally, it may require court involvement. We're offering mediation as a way to review everything cooperatively." Patrick laughed under his breath. "Cooperatively? With him?" Denise closed the file slowly. "This will tear apart what little is left of this family." Sam looked at her, really looked at her. There was fear in her eyes, but also something else, something like guilt. "I didn't tear this family apart," Sam said softly. "The truth did, long before any of us had a say." Patrick stood abruptly. "We're done here. If you want to fight, Sam, you'll get one." Denise rose more slowly, slipping her purse strap over her shoulder without meeting Sam's eyes. The mediator tried to intervene, but it was useless. Patrick was already at the door. Denise followed, pausing only once, just for a second, as if she wanted to turn back. But then she didn't. Sam sat there a long moment after they left, staring at the empty chairs. Laura placed a gentle hand on his arm. "You handled yourself well," she said, "even if they didn't." Sam exhaled deeply. "They still see me exactly how he taught them to." Laura nodded. "That's why we keep going. For the truth, not for their approval." Outside the window, the courthouse lawn was bright with winter sunlight. But inside, Sam felt as if a shadow had shifted. The first battle wasn't over, not even close. Sam had just settled into his recliner, coffee in hand, when his phone rang. Laura's number flashed across the screen. She rarely called without scheduling. Something was wrong, or very right. He answered quickly. "Laura? Sam, I need you to come to my office as soon as possible." Her voice was calm, but there was an urgency beneath it. 20 minutes later, he stepped into her office. She closed the door behind him and motioned to the folder spread across her desk, thicker than any he'd seen before. "I dug deeper into the property records," she said, "and what I found changes everything." Sam felt his pulse quicken. "Tell me." Laura opened the folder. "These are loan documents tied to the Duncannon land. Loans your father took out over the years. Substantial ones. What caught my attention is that Patrick and Denise were listed as future beneficiaries on several of them." Sam blinked. "While he was still alive?" "Yes, and before any actual inheritance arrangements were formalized." "But why would he need loans? The farm wasn't struggling." "That's what raised the red flag." She handed Sam a photocopy of a 1983 loan agreement. His father's bold signature was unmistakable, but another signature, Margaret's, looked wrong. Too sharp, too practiced. A cold heaviness spread through his chest. "This isn't her handwriting." Laura nodded. "I had a handwriting analyst look at it informally. It's almost certainly forged." Sam swallowed hard. "Dad forged your signature?" "It appears so." Sam gripped the edge of the desk. Scenes from childhood rushed through his mind. His mother's trembling hands, her quiet apologies, her frequent illnesses, her eyes that always seemed tired even when she smiled. What else did he take from her? Sam whispered. Laura leafed through more papers. Deed modifications, loan collateral agreements, land use authorizations, all bearing signatures that didn't belong to Margaret Hollis. Your mother didn't just give up her land, Laura said softly. It was taken, piece by piece, on paper, through pressure, and apparently through forgery. Sam closed his eyes, his breath hitching. He took what wasn't his. Laura nodded, and he used it to secure financial benefits that he intended for your siblings. The weight of the deception pressed down on Sam like a physical force. The years of being told he was the ungrateful one. The years of being called the troublemaker. The years he believed he had walked away, when in truth he had fled a house where the truth had no air left to breathe. This isn't just about the inheritance anymore, Sam said quietly. This is about my mother. Laura's voice softened. Exactly. And the law takes forgery and coerced property transfer very seriously. If we proceed, we could uncover even more. Sam looked at the documents again, each line feeling like a scar he had never seen before. His mother had hidden the truth to protect him. His father had hidden the truth to protect himself. And now the truth was rising from the paperwork like a long-buried bone, finally breaking the surface. Sam straightened, a calm resolve settling in. Whatever comes next, I'm ready. Laura nodded. Then we build the case. Outside, the sky had darkened with approaching clouds, the kind that promised a storm. But Sam didn't feel fear. The real storm had started decades earlier. Now at last, he was walking into it with open eyes. The knock came just after sunset, sharp enough to make Sam flinch. He wasn't expecting anyone, he rarely did these days. And the hour alone was enough to raise the small hairs on his arms. Carlisle had quiet evenings, and most folks didn't show up unannounced. He opened the door cautiously. A young woman stood on his porch, bundled in a gray coat, her dark hair pulled back, her expression a mix of nerves and determination. She held a small wooden box against her chest like something precious. Are you Samuel Hollis? She asked gently. Yes, he said, studying her face. Can I help you? My name is Rachel Merritt, she said. My mother was Elaine Merritt, your mother's younger sister. Sam felt the world tilt. Just slightly. Just enough to steal his breath. Elaine. He hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in years. I didn't know Elaine had children, he managed. Rachel nodded. She passed earlier this year. Before she died, she made me promise to deliver something to you. She said it belonged in your hands, and that she waited too long to tell you herself. Sam stepped aside. Please come in. Rachel entered the living room, looking around at the quiet space, the framed photo of Margaret on the mantel, the half-finished cup of tea on the table. Sam motioned for her to sit, but she remained standing a moment, as if gathering courage. Then she held out the box. My mom kept this for decades, she said. Your mother gave it to her little by little letters she wrote during her last years. She never mailed them. She was afraid your father would intercept anything she sent. Something inside Sam cracked, though he kept his face calm. He took the box with steady hands, even though the weight of it felt like it might crush him. He opened it slowly. Inside were bundles of letters tied with thin ribbons, some yellowed, some torn at the edges, all written in his mother's neat, careful handwriting. His throat tightened. She wrote these for me? Yes, Rachel said softly. She wanted you to know what she couldn't say out loud. Sam lifted the first bundle. The paper trembled in his hands. Rachel sat finally, her voice steady but warm. She talked a lot about you, about how much she missed you, about how she regretted not protecting you more when you were young. A breath escaped Sam shakily. I thought she stopped reaching out by choice. Rachel shook her head gently. It wasn't her choice. Sam untied the ribbon and unfolded the top letter. My sweet Sam, it began. I hope one day these words find you. Your father grows stricter each year. I feel the walls closing. I pray you never come back here. Not until you are safe from his temper." The words blurred as Sam breathed through the ache rising in his chest. Rachel continued softly. He controlled who she saw, who she spoke to. "My mom used to sneak over when she could, but your father would turn her away at the door sometimes." Sam set the letter down, rubbing his eyes. "I had no idea. I thought she let me go." "She never let you go," Rachel said. "She was trying to shield you, even if it meant you'd misunderstand." Sam opened another letter. "They say the illness is spreading. I'm tired, Sam. I wish I could see you. I wish I had the courage to tell you everything I signed over, everything I lost. But your father watches too closely now." His breath hitched. "What illness?" he asked quietly, even though he already felt the answer forming like a shadow in his chest. Rachel swallowed. "She had cancer. It came fast. My mom wanted to tell you, but Raymond blocked her. He told the hospital staff who was allowed to visit. He told people you'd moved on and didn't want me bothered." Sam closed his eyes. A deep, aching silence stretched between them. He had always believed the distance between him and his mother was something she agreed to, something she accepted, something mutual. But now it was clear it had been a cage, not a choice. "How long?" he whispered. "How long was she sick before she passed?" "A year," Rachel said gently. "She asked for you every visit. My mom said she never stopped hoping you'd walk through the door." Sam felt something in him crumble, quietly, like the slow collapse of old wood. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. "I never got to say goodbye," he said. Rachel nodded softly. "I know." He stared at the letters again. Margaret's handwriting, her voice, her heart poured out on paper she never expected anyone to read while she lived. It was a connection he hadn't known he'd lost, and now was too late to save. Rachel placed a hand on the box. "She wanted you to have this. She believed you'd be the one to set things right. She told my mother that you saw things clearly, even as a boy. She trusted your heart." Sam's eyes stung as the truth settled in. His mother never abandoned him. His father had stolen their final chapter together. And the land, her land, was only one part of what was taken. He placed the lid gently back on the box, his movements slow, reverent. "Thank you, Rachel," he said, voice thick but steady. "You have no idea what this means." She offered a small, sad smile. "I think I do." Sam looked toward the window, the sky outside darkening. For the first time in decades, he felt his mother near, not in memory, but in truth. And truth, finally, was on his side. The box of letters sat on Laura Greystone's polished oak desk like a silent witness to decades of lies and silences. Sam placed it carefully in front of her, his hands lingering on the edges, as if touching them would somehow absorb the courage his mother had quietly left behind. Laura looked up from her notes, her sharp eyes softening when they met his. "These letters, they change everything," she said. Sam nodded slowly. "She trusted me with them. She wanted me to see the truth she couldn't speak aloud." Laura began reviewing the contents meticulously. Margaret's words, the handwriting comparisons, the deed transfers. "It's clear there's a strong case here. We can challenge the deed, expose the forgery, and pursue full ownership of the Duncannon property. Legally, this is solid." Sam felt a surge of something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. But with it came a shadow of hesitation. "And what about Patrick and Denise?" he asked quietly. "Filing this, it'll destroy whatever's left of our family." Laura leaned back. "That's the question, isn't it? But you have to ask yourself whose dignity matters more, your mother's or your siblings' pride." Sam closed his eyes, memories flooding back to a cold afternoon in Perry County, Pennsylvania, when he was 16. Raymond Hollis had slammed his hand down on the kitchen table, shouting over something trivial, a fight over chores, respect, a stubborn refusal to obey. I'm not doing it your way. Sam had said, his voice raw, unpolished, full of youthful defiance. You'll regret that, Sam, his father had barked. And for the first time, Sam felt the weight of standing alone. He remembered the taste of fear and exhilaration mixed together. He'd walked out of that house shortly afterward, a decision that had fractured his family, leaving gaps that no apology could fill. And yet, in that moment, he had felt alive and strangely free. Now, decades later, Sam realized he had been running from that moment his entire life, running from confrontation, running from truth, running from justice. Laura watched him quietly. Are you ready to stop running? Sam opened his eyes, letting the memories sharpen his resolve rather than weaken it. I am. My mother's dignity comes first. I won't let her life, her property, or her legacy be stolen quietly. Not anymore. Laura nodded, a small, approving smile touching her lips. Then we prepare to file. Once this is in motion, nothing will be the same. Sam's stomach tightened. The thought of Patrick and Denise finding out, of confrontations, of long-buried resentments surfacing. It was terrifying. But the fear was tempered by a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He leaned forward, placing both hands on the desk. I've spent too long letting others decide what my life means. I'm done with that. If this shakes the family, so be it. The truth isn't negotiable. Laura tapped a pen against her notes. We'll start with authentication, document verification, and drafting the initial filing. After that, your siblings will have to respond. Once filed, everything shifts for good. No turning back. Sam exhaled slowly, the weight of the upcoming storm pressing down, but also grounding him. For the first time, he wasn't just fighting for property. He was fighting for the mother who had loved him, protected him, and left him a roadmap when she could no longer speak aloud. He thought of Margaret's quiet voice, the tremor when she signed documents under pressure, the hidden letters he now held. She had trusted him with a secret she never dared reveal in life. He could not betray that trust, not for comfort, not for peace, not for any fleeting desire to be part of the family again. You're certain? Laura asked, breaking through his reverie. Sam nodded firmly. Certain. This is bigger than me, bigger than them. It's about righting a wrong that's lasted too long. Laura stood, gathering the letters and documents. Then we move forward. And Sam, once we file, everything shift for good. Be ready for that. He felt the truth of her words in his chest. There would be no quiet resolution, no soft reconciliations, no gentle acceptance. There would be fire. There would be resistance. There would be the raw, uncomfortable exposure of decades of secrets. But that was acceptable because it was necessary. Sam looked down at the letters again, feeling their weight, their history, their unspoken demands. And for the first time, he felt aligned with something larger than fear, purpose. He whispered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else, Mom, I won't let them take this from you again. Outside, the light of a late winter morning poured across Mechanicsburg, pale but insistent, much like the clarity settling in Sam's mind. He had chosen the fight his mother never could, and there was no turning back. The response from Patrick and Denise came faster than Sam had anticipated. Their attorney's letter arrived by courier, each word like a blade cutting through the fragile calm Sam had managed to hold. Greed, manipulation, fabrication. The accusations were laced with venom, framing him as the villain who had rewritten history for personal gain. Sam read the letter twice, sitting in his small living room in Carlisle, the winter sunlight slanting across the floorboards. His hands were steady, but inside, a familiar knot of old anger and sorrow tightened. He had anticipated resistance, but this felt like a punch straight to the heart. Laura, waiting on the other end of the line, had a calm but firm voice. They're trying to control the narrative before it even reaches court. Ignore the rhetoric. Focus on facts, Sam. We have proof. The forged signature will stand on its own. Even so, the bitterness lingered. He thought of Patrick's sneering smile in the mediation room, Denise's cold, protective silence. The same walls, the same stairs, the same shadow of Raymond Hollis stretching across every interaction. The court date was set for a hearing to examine the contested deed and Margaret's supposed signature. Sam spent the week preparing, reviewing letters, notes, and the photocopies of deeds with Laura. He could feel the weight of decades pressing down, every memory of family arguments, of his mother's quiet suffering, of his own walking away, all converging into this one moment. On the morning of the hearing, he arrived early to the Harrisburg courthouse. The stone building looked imposing, cold, and immovable, much like the years he had spent under Raymond's dominance. As he walked toward the entrance, he spotted Denise across the street, stepping out of a car, her expression unreadable. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Sam's chest tightened. He wanted to reach out to bridge the years of silence, but the distance between them felt unscalable. Denise's eyes flickered with something, regret, maybe, but she didn't move closer. The moment was raw and fragile, charged with unspoken words and memories too long buried. He whispered under his breath, "So much could have been different." Rachel, standing quietly at his side, placed a reassuring hand on his arm. Her presence was a quiet anchor, a reminder that he wasn't facing this alone. She hadn't needed to say anything. Her calm support said more than words ever could. Inside the courthouse, Sam met Laura near the courtroom door. "Ready?" she asked, glancing at the stack of papers in her arms. Sam nodded, though he felt the familiar churn of nerves. "As ready as I'll ever be." The hearing began with formalities, but the tension was immediate. Patrick's attorney opened with a sharp accusation. Sam was trying to rewrite the past, distort facts, and manipulate the court to gain what he had been denied. Denise sat behind him, expression neutral but tense, her fingers fidgeting with the strap of her purse. Sam kept his hands folded, steady, calm. He remembered his mother's letters, her quiet courage, the secrets she had entrusted to him. Those words and truths had more weight than any claim Patrick and Denise could make. When Laura presented the deeds and the handwriting analysis, the room went silent. The analyst's report confirmed what Sam had long suspected. Margaret's signature on the contested deed was forged. The papers showed inconsistencies in loops, pressure, and flow, proof that could not be ignored. Patrick's face flushed red. Denise looked down, her lips pressed tightly together. Sam felt a strange mix of vindication and sorrow. He hadn't wanted to hurt them. He had wanted truth. But the truth, it seemed, had its own momentum, unstoppable once set in motion. Later, outside the courthouse, Sam found a quiet moment alone. The cold wind bit at his cheeks, but he didn't notice. His thoughts drifted to all the years lost, the phone calls never made, the holidays spent apart, the words left unsaid. Rachel stood nearby, quiet, letting him have the space to reflect. "It's hard," she said gently. Sam nodded. "It's harder knowing how different life could have been if honesty had existed in this family. If my mother had been allowed to speak freely. If my father hadn't built walls around everything, around love, around truth." Rachel placed her hand lightly on his shoulder. "You're doing the right thing now. She entrusted you for a reason." Sam drew in a slow breath. I hope I'm strong enough for what comes next. The hearing is just the beginning. I have a feeling there's more waiting, more secrets, more lies, things they never imagined I would uncover." He looked at the courthouse steps, the world moving around him, indifferent yet watchful, his fists unclenched. The fight ahead was not just legal. It was moral, emotional, and personal. It would demand everything he had learned from a life shaped by absence, betrayal, and resilience. He felt Rachel's quiet presence beside him, steady and unwavering. He was not alone. Sam adjusted his coat, gripping the strap of his briefcase. "I need to be ready," he whispered to himself. "Whatever comes next, I'll face it." And as the doors of the courthouse loomed in front of him, Sam knew one thing for certain. This fight would bring the shadows of betrayal back into the light, and nothing would ever remain hidden again. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and nervous tension. Sam walked through the heavy double doors, the winter sun glinting off the stone facade, and felt the familiar mixture of fear and determination. Today wasn't just about papers and signatures. It was about his mother, his family, and decades of silence. Patrick and Denise were already inside, sitting stiffly in the front row, their lawyer whispering into Patrick's ear. Patrick's jaw was tight. Denise's hands clutched a small purse. They looked calm on the surface, but Sam could sense the taut nerves beneath. Laura guided Sam to a seat. "Remember, Sam," she said quietly, "let the facts speak. Your mother's letters and the forensic report do that perfectly." The judge entered, the gavel sounded, and the hearing began. The handwriting expert took the stand first. He held up high-resolution images of Margaret Hollis's authentic signature and the signature on the deed. "Look closely at the loops, the slant, the pressure points," the expert instructed the court. "The deed signature was forged. It doesn't match her natural writing in multiple measurable ways." Sam's heart raced. Patrick shifted uncomfortably. Denise's eyes widened slightly, but she stayed quiet. Laura then presented evidence of coercion and inconsistent loan paperwork. Dates didn't match hospital records. Notarizations were suspiciously timed, and multiple documents named Patrick and Denise as future beneficiaries, despite Margaret's lack of consent. Patrick's composure began to crack. He leaned forward, voice rising. "This is ridiculous. My father. He did what he had to. Sam is twisting everything to his advantage." Sam clenched his fists, but he let the evidence speak instead. "I'm only seeking what's rightfully my mother's. I'm not here to twist anything. I'm here to uncover the truth she entrusted to me." Denise's hands trembled. Her shoulders shook slightly, and a quiet sob escaped her. Sam's anger and sadness intertwined. He felt for her, even as she had been part of the deception. The judge paused, looking down at the stacks of papers. "Given the evidence presented, I am ordering a deeper investigation into all transfers, deeds, and loans associated with the Duncannon property. Until the final ruling, all property rights are suspended. No transfers or sales are to occur." A collective hush fell over the courtroom. Sam felt relief bubble up in his chest, but it was tempered by a gnawing sense that the story wasn't finished. Later, as the courtroom emptied, Laura pulled Sam aside. "There's one more thing," she said, lowering her voice. "I found a document Raymond Hollis hid in a secondary file. It wasn't in the will. It wasn't disclosed in any previous review. This one changes everything." Sam's stomach twisted. "What is it?" Laura glanced at him gravely. "It's a deed that explicitly names you as co-owner of the Duncannon land, signed by Margaret before Raymond interfered. He buried it, thinking it would never be found." Sam's chest tightened with disbelief and vindication. His father had tried to erase him entirely, but the proof was now undeniable. Laura handed him the folder. "We need to prepare for what comes next carefully. When this goes public, Patrick and Denise will react strongly." Sam nodded, gripping the folder. Relief, anger, sadness, and determination swirled inside him. He had finally uncovered the truth his father feared. Proof that his mother had intended for him to inherit what was rightfully hers. For the first time, Sam felt the weight of decades lifting slightly. The battle wasn't over, but now it had direction, and the truth long buried under lies was finally emerging into the light. The courtroom was tense the day of the verdict. Sam arrived early, the folder of Margaret's letters and the newly discovered deed clutched in his hands. Patrick and Denise were already seated, Patrick's glare sharp, Denise avoiding eye contact with anyone. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. Sam took a deep breath. He had rehearsed his emotions, but nothing could truly prepare him for the culmination of decades of secrets, deception, and family pain. The verdict was read slowly, deliberately. After reviewing the evidence, the court finds that the transfers of the Duncannon property were partially fraudulent. The forged signatures, coercion, and withheld deeds have been verified. Therefore, the 40 acres of Duncannon land, along with associated property rights, are to be restored entirely to Samuel Hollis. The courtroom reacted instantly. Patrick's jaw dropped, and he slammed his fist against the table. Denise's hands flew to her mouth. Tears welled up in her eyes. The judge continued. Furthermore, Patrick Hollis and Denise Hollis are ordered to repay funds connected to the loans obtained by Raymond Hollis using the property as collateral, to the extent verified by the court. Sam sat frozen for a moment. Relief and exhaustion crashed over him. Years of fighting, of silence, of suspicion, of heartbreak. It all culminated in this one moment. Patrick stormed out of the courtroom, muttering accusations under his breath. "You think you won, Sam? You ruined everything." Denise lingered, her expression softer, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry, Sam, for not understanding, for not seeing it sooner." Sam looked at her, feeling a strange blend of sorrow and clarity. He didn't hate her. He understood how fear and manipulation had shaped her actions, and he knew that revenge wasn't in taking the land, nor in forcing them to repay funds. The real victory was the truth his mother had entrusted to him, the truth that Raymond had tried to bury, the truth that had finally emerged intact. Walking away from the courthouse, Sam felt decades of weight begin to lift. He thought of Margaret, of the letters, of the hidden deeds, and of Rachel's gentle reminder that he had been chosen to set things right. He realized that revenge had never been about Patrick and Denise. Revenge had been about honor, about exposing the lies, about reclaiming the dignity that had been denied to his mother and to himself. As he stepped into the cold winter air, the sun breaking through clouds, he reflected quietly. Decades of deceit had shaped all of them, but the truth could reshape them too, if they chose to see it. Sam held the folder tightly against his chest. He didn't know what the future with Patrick and Denise would hold, or whether bridges could be rebuilt, but he knew one thing. The past no longer controlled him. The land was restored, but more importantly, the legacy of honesty and courage his mother had entrusted to him would endure. And for the first time in years, Sam felt a calm he hadn't known since his mother's final days, a sense that the fight had been worth it, and that, finally, justice had been done. The morning fog hovered low over the 40 acres in Duncannon, Pennsylvania, softening the edges of the land I had once only seen through the lens of stories and memories. The trees were bare, the grass muted under the chill of late winter, and the farmhouse stood quietly at the edge of the property like it had been waiting for me all these years. I stepped onto the land slowly, letting my boots sink into the frost-kissed earth. Each step stirred up memories I hadn't realized were buried so deep. The afternoons helping my mother in the garden, the summers running through these fields with Patrick and Denise before our father's shadow fell heavy, and the countless nights I had dreamed of returning, even when I knew I probably never would. I stopped in the center of the acreage, looking out at the hills beyond, and whispered, almost as if the wind would carry my words to her, "Mom, I finally understand. I finally see it." Her presence felt near, a gentle weight that pressed softly on my chest. All those letters, the hidden deeds, the truth finally laid bare. They weren't just paper and ink. They were her voice, her courage, her love reaching across time to guide me. The land stretched endlessly before me, silent but alive. It didn't belong to Patrick or Denise or to the echoes of my father's control. It belonged to the past and to the truth my mother had entrusted to me. Standing here, I felt the heavy burden of decades lift slightly. The anger and betrayal I had carried for years didn't vanish, but they shifted. They became part of the story, part of the reclamation of dignity she had fought to protect. I thought of the courtrooms, the lawyers, the confrontations with Patrick and Denise, and the letters Rachel had delivered. Every moment had been painful, but every step had been necessary. Justice wasn't just a verdict. It was a reckoning, a restoration of what had been stolen, and a recognition of the lives shaped by lies. I wandered toward the farmhouse, my hand brushing over the weathered fence posts. The structure stood as a testament to endurance, much like my mother had been a quiet, resilient presence that had survived storms I could only now begin to understand. Rachel had been waiting nearby, respectful and patient, letting me have this moment. She didn't need to say anything. Her presence reminded me that the truth had finally reached someone worthy, that the circle of trust had been restored. I sat on the porch steps, looking out over the land. So many years, I murmured, voice trembling slightly. So many lost years. I should have known the truth sooner, Mom. I should have fought sooner. But as the sun pierced through the fog, casting long, golden shafts of light across the fields, I realized that the fight had always been waiting for me, and that I had answered when it mattered most. Turning my gaze toward the horizon, I felt a strange peace. This wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense, not about taking something from Patrick or Denise, not about winning a battle for pride or satisfaction. My revenge had always been different. My revenge was about truth, about reclaiming what had never rightfully been stolen, about honoring a woman who had loved fiercely and quietly. I looked directly into the camera. If you were here with me, what would you have done in my shoes? I asked, voice low but clear. Would you have let it go, or would you have faced the people you loved and feared to make things right? The question hung in the crisp morning air. There's no simple answer. I don't know if Patrick or Denise will ever forgive me, or even themselves. What I do know is that I finally reclaimed a piece of life that was never truly mine to lose. And in that reclamation, I found something more powerful than anger or revenge. I found closure. I stood and walked to the edge of the property, letting the wind carry the faint scent of pine and soil. I felt the history of this place, the laughter, the arguments, the quiet moments of my mother's guidance, and I realized something important. The land itself was not the inheritance. The inheritance was the truth, the justice, and the ability to finally honor the person who mattered most. I closed my eyes for a moment, speaking softly as if she were beside me. Mom, I did it. I kept my promise. I finally saw the truth, and I finally acted on it. This land, this life, it's yours again in a way. And in reclaiming it, I've reclaimed myself too. Opening my eyes, I felt a calm I hadn't known in decades. The weight of lost time remained, but it no longer pressed on me like a shadow. It was a reminder, not a chain. I walked back toward the farmhouse, the winter sun fully illuminating the land, and spoke again, quieter this time, more reflective. My revenge wasn't about taking something. It was about reclaiming what never should have been stolen. The camera pans out, capturing the expanse of the land. The small figure of a man standing finally in peace amidst the inheritance of truth, the wind whispering through the trees like a voice carried from the past. And for the first time in decades, I felt a full, quiet closure, a reckoning not born of hatred, but of courage, justice, and love.